So before we get started with this video, there's something I need to mention. The way that this is going to break down is I'm going to make 3 separate videos. For this mod is called the Perkus Maximus, and because of the way it is made, it's very extensive. And rather than try and fit a 40 to 50 or an hour long video trying to explain everything, I'm going to break it down into the 3 subjects of the mage, the warrior, and the thief. This video is going to focus on the mage. I will cover the thief and the warrior sometime in the next few days. So I apologize if this video doesn't seem complete to you, but again, it's only because the mod is so expansive. It would take too long to try and do everything in a single video. That being said, let the intro begin.
In their tongue, he is Dovahkiin, Dragonborn.
With that being said, let's get started. This is for the Perkus Maximus. This is the mage portion of this mod. What this does as a whole, and this will cover for all 3, is that it changes the way that skills and perks work in Skyrim. So rather than, okay, well this perk lets me do X amount of more damage with an extra level spell or less magic, it actually gives you something to work towards. It'll have an overall goal for you to become a certain type of mage or a certain type of warrior, so on and so forth. Like I said, I'll go into more explanation for each one of the classes as I get to those videos. So to start off here, when you first enter into one of the perks, we're going to be doing destruction as a starting point. You'll notice that they'll be named different and that the description will be different. Now, it may not seem it's not very obvious as to what this does, but if you download the mod, there will be a documentation in the same download location to where you can get a full list of what everything does, so that way you won't be blindly picking. I'm going to cover a few of these into each one of the categories, so you'll have a general idea of what they do. So starting from the very beginning, studies novice destruction. What this does is gives you a random novice level destruction spell. Now you can't choose, obviously, because it's random, and when you pick it, you'll see at the top left hand side what you get. For me, I got static skin. What this does is the next shock spell I cast is 50% stronger. So we'll do a little demonstration here. I always summon bandits. I think because they're just so fun to kill, and they make me mad sometimes. So, as you can see, regular shock spell. Not too much damage, as you can see. Very vanilla, very basic. We'll add the shock skin to it. And as you can see, a little bit more potent in the damage department. Now the way this works is that for one cast it increases it by 50%. Now as far as continuous electric spells such as the sparks, I'm not 100% sure if it works for all ticks of that. If I had to guess, I would say that it works for every tick as long as you keep continuously holding down the button to cast that spell. But again, this is something that would need to be tested further. Moving on from that, if you decided to pursue this path even further and go down the destruction path, what you can do is level up the apprentice destruction. Like the novice, it gives you a random apprentice level spell. Same with the add up, it gives you a random add up level of destruction spell. Gives you an expert level, a master level, and then the focuses I will get into in just a second. So if you go back to your magic, as you can see from the spells I've learned, from the master level I learned the quartering touch. From the add up level I learned the fireball. From the apprentice level I learned the ice spike. From the expert level I learned the pyroelectric orb. So each one of these does something different, obviously. The Quartering Touch deals 10 points of shock and frost damage to health each, as well as 300 frost damage to stamina and 300 frost damage to magic. So it's a magic spell for a reason. It's very powerful. Now, of course, you have to be very up close. So we're going to summon another bandit here. Now, while it doesn't do a lot of damage health-wise, it's doing a lot to his stamina. As you can see, it does 300 frost damage to stamina and shock damage, which means she's going to not be able to swing as much. He'll be a lot slower. So it's for one of those things where you need to get away and reposition yourself. The Pyroelectric Orb, what it does is a small ball of lightning. When you cast it, it actually does 5 points of damage to health and magic and 5 points of fire damage to health. While not the strongest in its initial cast, what it does is it boosts other abilities such as fire and shock magic by a small amount. So while you have this active, spells like the Flames, Sparks, not Ice Spike, but the Fireball will do more points of damage when you have this equipped. So it's for one of those to where you need to quickly boost a certain type of magic. Moving on from that, we'll go into some of the branching options of the destruction, or yes, the destruction perks. Defiant Concentration. What this does is, depending on how you look at it, it could be a buff or debuff to yourself. While below 20% magic, all fire, frost, and shock spells are 70% weaker, but they're 80% cheaper to cast, which means that you'll be doing a lot less damage, but it'll cost you a lot less magic to use. When you upgrade that again, you still have the same 70% weaker, but it's 95% cheaper to cast. So at this point, if you decide to level this up twice, you can pretty much spam magic for a good amount and still do some okay damage, but you're not going to be burning people alive. This is more for like, okay, well, I have to do something. I have to either cast a fireball, I need to cast, probably runes would be the best thing to cast for this, where you need to slow down the enemy, or you need to lay down traps while you get away. It's not something that can be used to actually do more continuous damage. Branching from that, Ambitious Methods. What this does is increases all destruction spells damage by 10%, and by each 4 skill levels that you put into the destruction perk, you'll gain an additional 1%. So this is something that you might want to grab early, so that you get the benefits of it early, because I'm not too sure if you pick it after you've picked other abilities that it will proc the additional 1% every 4 skill points that you put in. Sigil of Thunder and Sigil of Flame and Sigil of Ice are all around the same aspects. Sigil of Flame, all fire spells reduce target's armor rating by a magnitude of 5 hits per second. Sigil of Ice, pretty much what it does is frost damage deals 1/3 of their magnitude as additional physical damage, which is interesting. And Sigil of Thunder, what this does is shock spells deal 10% of the target's armor value as additional damage. This damage cannot be resisted, so pretty much you'll proc through defenses with Thunder. So again, this is something that you might want to play around with if you want to be a certain type of mage, because of course you can't get enough skill points to do every single thing. So it's something that you really want to try and kind of balance yourself into being something. Like if you want to be focused on fire, I would pick basically Sigil of Fire, the Cradle of Fire, which is, what this does is fire spells can be dual casted to increase their magnitude, so you'll do more, you'll reduce the target's armor, you'll reduce the target's armor a lot quicker, and once per enemy you'll have a chance to actually disarm them while dual wielding fire spells. So again, this is something that you want to play around with. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each one of these. I will briefly talk about the Elementalist, or not, what the focus spells does. Focus perks are pretty much what you get at the end of going through a branched path. So if you want to go through the destruction path, what this does is it pretty much classifies you of what type of mage or what type of warrior you want to be. So for the mage, for the sake of this video, the mage destruction is you can be an elementalist or you can be a siege mage. The Elementalist gets a boost of all magic, both all fire, shock, and ice. You'll get a greater increase of that. You can pretty much tear through defenses, and I believe the power, which I had problems actually getting to work, is that you'll be able to summon pretty much a random fire, ice, or lightning storm. What it does is when you cast a spell, it's supposed to rain down from the sky. However, I had issues with this. I couldn't get it to work properly. The Siege Mage, however, what this does is, at the cost of mobility, all your spells do a lot more damage. So this is something to where, okay, this is a final stand type thing. I know I can't get away, but I need to do as much damage as possible. So I'll show off the Siege Mage. As you can see at the top left hand, it says Siege Mode Activate, or ability. Not activate. Pretty much, this is a toggle on and off ability. For this example, we'll have flames. Now, as you can see, I'm walking around normal. I'll have to take off God mode for this. Walk around normal, do normal things. When you toggle on the siege mode, what this does is pretty much plant your feet into the ground more or less. You become encumbered, but your spells do a lot more damage. So we're gonna test this off on a bandit. Hopefully I don't actually die. Matter of fact, I'm just gonna borrow his armor for a second. And I'm gonna take your katana. So, summon a quick bandit here. As you see, I do pretty decent amount of damage because again, I'm leveled up. Pretty decent amount. Now let's try the same thing with siege mode. As you can see, I do a lot more damage. I can kill a lot quicker, but the drawback of that again is you cannot escape at all. Like, you can't run. You can still use, I believe, teleporting spells if you have those, but in terms of escaping, you're pretty much a sitting stone. You pretty much plant your feet in the ground and you try and do as much damage as possible. So it's really cool in the aspect of pretty much being a powerhouse, if you will. You want to be the mage that pretty much dominates the battlefield, so I would go with that if that's what you want to go towards. The Elementalist, I believe, is for if you want to use all types of magic. Like if you use a mix of lightning, ice, and fire, and you want to have a cool, like, cinematic ice storm looking spell. Unfortunately, again, I couldn't get it to work, so maybe you'll have better luck than I will. So, to give a little bit more for the mage class, we're gonna go into the opposite end of the spectrum from the destruction class and take a look at some of the things you can do with the restoration class. Now, as before with the novice, apprentice, adept, expert, and master, you'll get one random spell from each one of those once you level them up. So we'll level each one up and see what we get here. There we go. So we'll take a quick look here. The first one we got is the Aura Chastise, which is a toggleable aura that blocks regeneration abilities of undead creatures. Keeping it up reduces maximum health and stamina, so this is good if you're in pretty much in a dungeon to where you're constantly fighting undead. You can stop them from regenerating health with this. Another one we got is Cleansing. If the target is below 40% health, it dies. If not, it loses 20% health. Only works by targets affected by Chastise, so you need to actually combine the Aura Chastise with the Cleansing. Curse of Roots. For 60 seconds, each attack has a chance to turn the target into a tree permanently. If it dies while the spell is active, the curse might jump to a nearby target. Or excuse me, to a new nearby target. So that's actually interesting for a restoration spell. Of course, you have your healing, which is pretty standard. The Stream of Life heals the caster 30 points per second, needs to charge up. And then you have the Thorn's Weave, Thorn's Wraith, excuse me. A plague that randomly staggers the target in certain intervals, spreads that to targets within 10 feet range. So this is a really good area of effect attack. So we'll take a look at the Curse of Roots and the, I believe it's called the Thorn's Weave, or Thorn's Reef, excuse me. So once again, we'll need to summon a trusty bandit here. And so in my left hand, we're going to be using the Curse of Roots. In the right hand is the Thorn's Reeve. Actually takes some time to charge up. So as you can see, it actually transformed him into a tree. So that's actually very interesting. I would say that it's cool, except that you can't of course loot anybody, but I think once you get to a certain level, that's no longer a thing that you need to worry about. In the right hand, we're going to be taking a look at Thorn's Reeve. Or Thorn's Right, excuse me. So we'll summon three bandits should be good. We'll summon 3 here. As you can see, the plague spreads to them. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but as you can see, it's doing the intended effect of staggering the opponent. So it's not as much a damaging spell as it is a enfeeble or a debuff skill, or not an enfeebling, but a debuff skill. So pretty much staggers all opponents nearby in a 10-foot radius. So that's actually something that's very useful if you want to play more of the support type of class. So moving on from that, we'll go over some of the other additional perks you can get with this. First up is Purification. This effect requires that you have the Chastise, which you more than likely will have as your first starting perk. To be active on a target that needs certain health percentages to trigger their strongest effect, to have their trigger threshold increased by 20%. So I know that's a little technical, so basically what this means is that the effect of Chastise will have a greater effect with spells that are linked to it. So say you get the spell Purgatory, it will instantly kill any target that, it will kill any target and detonate at 60% health allure, where it's originally at 40% allure. So if you have a lot of spells that require you to use Chastise, like Purgatory or this one that I just shown up earlier, then this is something you might want to consider picking up. Regrowth is, I'm sorry, it's just these Skyrim's dumb when it comes to trying to pick perks, but regardless, Regrowth, this is pretty much where your healing spells do 25%, your healing spells are 25% stronger and may be dual casted to further increase their magnitude. So this is just a buff to all your healing spells, rather that be for yourself or your allies. Reprise is healing spells additionally cover stamina as well, so you can actually play with this as a warrior if you want to spend points in restoration. So that's actually pretty interesting. Moving on from that, we have Aromancer, which is the aura range is spread out from level 1. It is increased by 35%, and then at level 2 is increased by 70%. So that's actually a pretty big jump. So it's actually really effective. Excuse me. Moving on from that, we have Life and Death. In addition to other scaling bonuses, this is for level 1. Damaging auras get X amount stronger, where X is your restoration skill level. So what this means is that the higher your restoration level, the more scaling, or the better scaling that your auras do in terms of damage. At level 2, this increases by both your restoration skill and your destruction skill. So this is really useful if you are kind of in the middle of destruction and restoration. So that's something you might want to consider picking up. Over here we have Ward Deflection, which is at level 1. When your ward is up, you take 20% less damage from ranged attacks. It makes Spell Ward grant 50% armor while you have it equipped in your hand, and when you use it, you gain another 50 point bonus to armor. At level 2, this is increased. The damage mitigation is increased by 35%. The Spell Ward grants you 75% armor, and another 75 when it's being used. So level 1, it's 50%, pretty much a 50% boost in armor, and at level 2 is a 75% boost in armor when you have the ward both equip it and when you both use it. Ward Absorb is kind of like how it sounds. Whenever you use a ward to absorb a spell, you pretty much get some of your magic back. In this case, you gain about 20% of the magic that hits it. So any master level spell that requires a lot of mana to use, you can get back quite a bit of mana for yourself, or magicka if you want to be technical with it. Carrier is something that is very useful if you have a lot of plague or spells that bounce from one person to the next. The plague range is spread increased from about 10 feet to 20 feet. The plague can be dual casted for a 50% boost in speed range, so that means it spreads a lot quicker. You take 5% less damage from enemies that are affected by the plague. The plague spread at level 2 is increased from 20 feet to 30 feet and can also be dual casted for a 50% boost. You'll take 10% less damage from enemies affected by the plague. So if you have a lot of plague spells, this is something that you might want to be looking out for. So from there we move up to Plague Lord, which at level 1, plagues will attempt to infect a new target every 2 seconds instead of every 3 seconds. At level 2, the plague will try to affect a new target every second instead of every 1 second, which is kind of weird when you say that on paper. I think it means that pretty much it'll tick like every second instead of probably every 2 seconds. I believe it's what it means. It seems there might be some kind of error there, but it just seems kind of weird when you read it. But regardless, what this does initially is that it will spread the plague a lot faster and will try to infect at every other second instead of a longer duration of time. Moving on from that, we have the Malediction. Now what this does is, this is more for curses. At rank 1, curse spreads radius grows from around 10 feet to 20 feet. Curses will try to find a new target twice if the old target dies while the curse is active on them. At rank 2, the radius grows from 20 feet to around 30 feet, and the curse will try to find a new target every 3 times instead of every 2 times. So the more you level this up, the better the chance that the curse will spread on to someone else. Tortured Soul, which is that spells that normally will be restricted to undead targets will now work on targets affected by curses. So in theory, what you can do is that you can use one of the curses and then use a holy spell that only works against undead. So that way you don't feel completely useless if you actually go towards I guess not really a paladin, but a holy warrior, to where you only strike the undead and monsters. So this is actually very useful for you if you need to fight regular people. Moving on from that, we have Meditation, which meditation is actually a pretty interesting one. While your health is below 40%, restoration spells cost 15% less to cast. While your health is below 20%, this bonus increases to around 25%. At rank 2, when your health is below 40%, restoration spells are 25% cheaper to cast, and when you're below 20%, this bonus increases to around 35%. So the less health you have, the more you can heal yourself. In theory, it'll be cheaper to cast healing spells, so this is the time where you want to cast those stronger healing spells to bring yourself up to pretty much a reasonable amount of health. So on from that, we have Defy Death. Now, despite its name, it doesn't actually stop you from dying per se. What it does is that if your health drops below 50%, a health regeneration is increased by 50%. If your health drops below 25%, this bonus increases to around 100%. So you'll have your health regeneration will increase pretty much. You'll start getting back health more instantly. And once per day, dropping below 10% health will cause you to automatically recover 250 health. So pretty much once per day. I guess in theory you do defy death, but it's only once per day. So pretty much you can recover from almost a critical wound, if you're lucky enough and doesn't wipe you out completely. But on from that, we actually have 2 focuses that you can choose from if you decide to go the full restoration route. The first one is the Defiler. Now this focuses on a lot of curses and plagues. The official description is that you deal 10% more damage, 10% more weapon damage against targets affected by curses and plagues. Curses and plagues are 25% cheaper to cast. This grants the spell Curse of Binding, which Curse of Binding Affects only enemies that are already affected by a plague. As long as the target is affected by Curse of Binding is alive, the spellcaster is immune to any damage, but any spell cast is 50% more expensive. So pretty much anyone who's affected by the Curse of Binding, they can't really do any damage to you, but you can't really use you can't really use a lot of magic spells because it costs twice as much to cast, even those that are more on the lower tier. So this is the time where you probably want to switch to a melee weapon, or if you need to pretty much save yourself and let your allies actually kill the enemy for you. This is something that you can use. On the opposite end of that, we have I don't know why it's way over here, we have the Idol. Now this is more of the healing type of mage if you want to be so. Healing spells are 20% stronger. Auras are free to toggle. This removes any of the health and stamina debuffs mentioned earlier from said auras. Grants the spell aura aspect of brilliance. The aura aspect of brilliance is the only aura that affects both enemies and allies. Allies deal 50% more damage with destruction spells and any weapons, while enemies deal 15% less damage with destruction spells and any weapons. So pretty much this is where you want to cast this in a sort of a big fight. This is pretty much a opener, if you will. You'll cast this and then you can pretty much either poke down an enemy that way, or if you want to try and close out a battle while actually healing your allies, you can pop this, start healing everybody, and know that they are taking less damage and actually dealing out more damage. So it's a really good buff. It's a good situational buff. Unlike the destruction spells, there's really no real way to show these off. It's one of those things where you have to test an actual live combat to see how it fits out for you. So what I would suggest is that once you get to this point, you branch off into 2 save files and kind of play with both the Defiler and the Idol and see which one you like the best. But as I said before, this is going to be part 1 of 3 videos. This is covering a little bit of the mage aspect. The next video will cover the warrior, and the final video will cover the thief. So I hope you guys are looking forward to those. And like I said before, the reason I'm doing this in 3 parts is because the fact that this mod is very extensive, as you can see. Only covering one part of this takes roughly around 20 minutes, probably longer. So you can see where I didn't want to combine every aspect of the mod itself. And there's even some stuff I didn't even cover in this video, to which you can actually read a little bit more information on. So hope you guys appreciate the video, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.